Hello everyone and welcome to Proxy Pages. I am your host, Hacker, and I'm here to give you guys a little bit of an update as well as a disclaimer on this video. Firstly, I would just like to say that yes, the title is called The Cure for Homosexuality. Hopefully, I would assume that the people that come here do not immediately assume the worst out of this story and do not wish hate on the creator or its contents or on my video simply because they disagree with the title. Also, as an update, you'll have to forgive me. I am still recovering from a cold. The flu has been going around very badly, and unlike other entities around here, I am human and I still get sick and I am still pregnant and I still have 5 more months to go. So getting sick is something that happens quite often. So please bear with me. You might hear some sniffles or some sniffling. Just kind of ignore it or run with it. Without further ado, I bring to you The Cure for Homosexuality. I was 5 years old the first time that my father called me a faggot, and 13 when he truly meant it. I had watched President Obama's "It Gets Better" speech about a dozen times in a row. I had cried, stopped, cried harder, stopped again, and walked slowly to where my father was sitting in the living room. I'd rehearsed hundreds of different ways to say it, and finally settled on the strongest one. "Dad, I want to talk to you about something. I'm gay." Mom was usually terrified of Dad's wrath, but she saved me a trip to the hospital. She picked up a bag of frozen peas at the AM/PM and took it to the flea market motel, where she and I spent the next week. The bag was painfully cold against my face, but she held it firmly in place even as I struggled to push it away. "I know it stings, Pumpkin, but it's the best way to treat that black eye. Trust me on this." She uttered a sigh so delicate that I was afraid it might break. "The cut Dad's ring left under your eye will take about a week or 2 to heal. I'm so sorry." I cried then. The tears pressed hard against the frozen bag. The icy drops ran down my cheek. When the cold had melted away, I leaned against my mother's shoulder while she pulled me deep into her blouse. The smell of Tide and knockoff Mary Kay perfume and Virginia Slims embedded itself so deeply into my memory. That night, that I'm perpetuated one whiff away from a flashback. My tears were no longer frozen, and they flowed unabated. "Why did God make me gay, Mom?" "I don't know, Pumpkin." She squeezed through her own gentle tears, and she rocked me back and forth. "I don't want to be like this anymore." I heaved, trembled, and regained my voice. "Can we fix it? I don't want anything else. Anything at all." She was silent at first. After several painful, tense seconds, all she could say was, "I'm sorry." My crying stopped then. Something had deadened inside of me, and it flipped the tears like a switch. "Mom?" I asked I prodded quietly. "Why is love so fucking complicated?" Her fingers slipped unconsciously to the thin wedding band in her left hand. She spun it slowly, but kept it in place. "I don't know, Pumpkin," she heaved. "I'm so sorry. I just don't know." I didn't miss having a father in my life. Other people, however, took close note of my condition. I tried to hide it, but teenage boys could practically smell it on me, and they were all too happy to ridicule the fact that I admired them more. I had assumed the joining of a freshman football team would be the perfect plan to make new friends at a new school. It seemed like the ideal way to prove my highly doubted masculinity. I was wrong. Chad Bragg, slender and athletic, was a freshman quarterback. He had frosted tips, the look was popular then, dressed like Gianna Verskos, and carried himself with the confidence of an asshole who had earned his arrogance. To be honest, he would have been my type if he weren't such a dick. Chad would always have this loyal squad of fellow football players around him, even in the locker room. And contrary to my assumptions, it was not an erotic expression to be around a bunch of prepubescent boys changing their clothes. They smelled like shit, and most of them had looks to match the odor. But the most important part about the locker room is that no adults ever came inside. I immediately knew that something was wrong when the door slammed shut. The sound just went off as it reverberated into the room. I looked around and quickly realized that I was alone. And then I wasn't. Chad and 6 other teammates of various sizes and intelligence quickly positioned themselves around me. I became hyper-aware that I was the only one wearing underwear and a t-shirt. My locker was open. I wasn't ready. I was surrounded. My heart hammered, and I tried to think, but I could only focus on the growing panic. An enormous lineman named Gage picked me up. He was strong enough to restrict my breathing. He threw me face down on the floor. 4 different boys grabbed each of my limbs, and Gage sat painfully on my back. Chad got on his hands and knees and leaned towards me with a smile. I could smell Listerine and an Axe body spray on him. His face was an inch from mine. "You know what? I like you, Phillips." "I know who you like." His grin showed a veneer of straight white teeth. "Did you think you'd be out of place here? Don't worry, kid. I've got just what you want." I had 2 blissful seconds of complete ignorance before the boys holding my legs began to pull back my underwear. Chad's grin split wider as he pulled a broomstick out from behind him and pointed it at my face. "Phillips, this welcoming ritual that will make you feel right at home." I understood what that broom handle was for. As Chad stood up and walked behind me, I screamed. They laughed. Every step of the walk home was agony. I drifted past my mother without a greeting, headed straight for the bathroom and closed the door behind me. I turned on the hot water. The razor blades were on the top shelf of the medicine cabinet. My hands shook. Tears blurred my eyes, but I told myself to hold on just a few more minutes, and I wouldn't have to carry the pain that was too much for one boy. That all the wrongness would spill out. It would all finally pour into a vial of the world that hated me from the inside. My fingertips turned white, and the blade was unsteady. I wanted to cut it all away, every piece of hate and filth. My vision tunneled. I wiped away the tears and saw Mom looking back at me in the mirror, and she spoke to my reflection. "Don't do it. Don't pretend your life is just your own." She was sheet white and expressionless. "One of the worst things about living is that you can't choose how deeply you affect those most vulnerable to you." She breathed deeply. It trembled and rattled. "But that's why I get out of bed on these days, when I can't find any other fucking reason. Don't you dare forget that." The water gurgled down the drain. I stared at her reflection, and she stared back. The razor trembled in my hands. Then my mother turned around and left the room. The blade held my vision until tears made it too difficult to see. I closed my eyes and listened to the gentle roar of the drain's endless thirst. Mom had already started eating when I joined her at the dinner table that night. We ate without conversation. Only the soft sounds of chewing interrupted a silence that was heavy as the lineman crushing my back. I didn't quit the team. After closing the razor back inside the medicine cabinet, it became impossible to imagine doing so. I lifted. No one would stand near me in the weight room, so I worked on my own. Years passed. It's dangerous to max without a spotter, but it feels safest when alone. Most of my lifting took place on my own, late at night when I was at the nearest 24-hour fitness. I cried when I hit 330 on the bench press. I stopped the tears when I realized that it had been the first since my freshman year. It made sense to ask my coach about starting. He gave me a wary eye. "I think you're safest on the bench, Phillips." My uniform remained starch white that season, but I still remember the locker room every game and changed. The world set me up for failure, but I chose to decline the offer every time. I had to watch Chad win the affections of student and teacher alike. He spent his time surrounded by an ever-changing harem of women and seemed more comfortable socializing with them than any of the boys on the team. I never really understood the attention, but I had learned long ago to stop trying to comprehend human affection. He completed 19 passes on the season, only 13 of which gained yardage, and we went 3-7 against the weak schedule. I had been tasked with an extra equipment cleanup after the game since Ogden High School. The game with Ogden was supposed to be a very big deal around my school. It was supposedly one of the biggest rivalries in the state. So I was the one in the locker room, the second one out. Chad was the one waiting by the door with a smile on his face but no shirt on his chest. "Hey, Phillips," he said coyly, poking my arm. "I bet you think that no one's seen that you've been up here." He gave me a half smile and a steady eye, and he clearly didn't know I was disconforming. "Well, I've noticed," he continued, flashing a grin of straight white teeth. He brushed his hair away from his face with one hand and touched my biceps with the other. He leaned in towards my face and his eyes were closed. I was surprised by how light he felt as I pushed his frame against the wall. He stared at me in shock, one hand gently clasped around the other's wrist. "You're not used to hearing the word no," I said, mostly to myself. "You're just the saddest thing." I paused right before the door closed on me. Without looking back, I shouted, re-awarded, "Being gay doesn't mean I like every asshole." Chad wasn't the only one to notice. As I walked off the field of our final defeat, the luster of high school football drew away with a physical pull. We herded into the locker room and finally understood that it was nothing more than a metal clothes receptacle filled with long-dried sweat. When the last Division III college had rejected Chad's application, it finally became obvious that God had granted teenage notoriety as consolation for an insufficient life ahead. After we were 6 months removed from football, even Gage turned on Chad. He didn't care who knew it. The last chance dance was an annual tradition, steeped in high school ritual of finally being rejected by a longtime crush. I didn't know why I went, but I didn't regret leaving early. The parking lot seemed empty until I saw Gage. He was standing next to Damien, who had played nose guard on the football team. They had cornered Chad between two cars and a cinder block wall. Chad was terrified. "Fucking A, man," Gage grunted. "Can't go one goddamn night without making a pass at another guy. We warned you about this shit." Chad pressed himself against the cinder blocks. His efforts to conceal his tears were utter failures. He looked down at Gage, what was holding in his fist, and gasped. Chad didn't try to hide the tears at what came next. What should I have done in that situation? If justice and goodness are at odds, the only chance is to escape brokenness in a world designed for imbalance. I chose to accept the fair thing from happening. I declined justice for too long and felt beholden to the concept. Damien threw a right cross against Chad's pretty face. His skull bounced against the cinder blocks, and a bloody cut opened under his eye. Damien grabbed Chad's throat. Gage closed in on Chad, and I descended on them both. I tossed Gage with ease to either of us, as expected. I enjoyed a moment as his frozen hopelessness shock as he spun through the air and realized who was responsible for his dominance. Gage collided violently with Damien, and the two fell to the ground in a heap. A very bloody heap. The district attorney had no interest in charging me. Gage had been holding his own knife, and I was acting to prevent a crime. Damien's grieving parents did blame me for the death of their son. To be perfectly honest, I judged them if they didn't. Gage didn't take his own life on the strictest definition. The guy never went to college and didn't get a job. I wonder how he would feel in this exact moment when he finally realized that he had pissed away his entire fucking life. As for Chad, he didn't hesitate to show me gratitude. The two of us had waited side by side until my mom came to pick me up at the police station. I didn't brush his hand away when he laid it on mine. I let him speak. Phillips, man, I've done some bad things. I'm sorry. He looked at me with passion of a drowning man reaching for his last chance of hope. After all this shit, he squeezed my fingers, turning them white. Could you give me a chance? Could you be the bigger man? I looked down at our interlocked fists, and then placed the free hand on top of his. And then I pried my hands away. I stood and walked towards the door before turning around to face him. Don't be fucking stupid. The past doesn't go away, Chad. I threw on my jacket. I can't change it, and I can't ignore it. You know how I deal with the past, Chad? He looked at me with the sadness and evoked sympathy, but was useless against my resolve. I smiled. Pride.